So you didn't even know, but you got bit by the aviation bug. And here you are sitting wondering, how do I become one of those, a pilot? Perfect, because we're going to tell you exactly how. Welcome to Aviation Intrigue.
This is aviation intrigue.
When I was at Oshkosh, I got to meet a few people who were really excited about learning how to fly, about getting their pilot's license. And one of the first questions I always ask is, what are some of the reasons that got you interested? And I know you get a lot of inquiries too, Gopal. So what do you tell them?
I find it interesting that there's so many variations of the reasons why people want to fly. There are people who have very, very specific mission. They want to buy a house on a lake, and so they want to know how to fly a seaplane. There are people who are interested in a career, whether it's a military career or a commercial career or fly airlines. And then a lot of people are, I just want to have fun. I want to fly recreational. I want to take my family to places, maybe go places where I cannot drive. So this is, I think, as diverse as people are.
Definitely. There's a lot of stories that you hear about. Oh, my dad was a recreational pilot and he used to fly us up north to go camping, or he used to fly us down to Florida in the winter. And that's something I've always wanted to pick up on. That's one of the stories I've heard. I also hear I don't have anyone in my family who is in aviation, but I've always been interested. And I got an airplane ride from a friend once, and ever since then I wanted to explore getting my pilot's license. So there's all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the beauty of aviation, I think.
And part of it is that they don't always know about the diversity of aircraft they can fly. You mentioned seaplanes, and that's something that someone can do after their initial training. And so just hearing about people's goals is really interesting.
Yeah, in fact, whenever somebody comes to me and say, "Hey, I want to learn to fly, where do I start?" My first question is to sit with them and understand what their goals are. Everybody's goal may be different, so there is no cookie cutter. If you have a goal of flying personal mission, that's going to be a slightly different tactic than, let's say, you want to pursue a career in airlines. So that's the first thing I do, and I'm sure you do the same thing, which is understand how much time they can commit to this, how much money and other resources they have. Because let's face it, flying takes time, flying takes money. So understanding all those things, then I can figure out what is the best option for them, which route is best for them.
So if somebody says, which is a very common reason, it just looks like a lot of fun. It looks like a fun challenge. I want to learn something new and I just want to do this personally for now and enjoy it. How do you get them started?
I think that's the most common reason. A lot of people come in and say, I just enjoy being around with airplanes. And like you mentioned, maybe grandfather or father or somebody in their family used to fly. Find a local flight school and start taking lessons. It's as simple as that.
And that's probably the easiest way if you live in a town that may have an airport that offers a local flight school. And so you can schedule a meeting with the flight instructor and really get the lay of the land, because some places will have one or two flight instructors and some places will have a lot and a lot of different aircraft. So be ready to ask those questions when you go in.
Yeah, precisely. And we did an episode earlier on, which I'll put a link to, about airports. And we talked about big airports, medium airports, small airports. And chances are, even small airports have a flight school of some kind. It may not be a big operation, but there will be flight instructors associated with that. There will be planes that you can rent there because obviously you need an instructor and you need an airplane. And that's the nice thing about it. Don't dismiss a small place because or a small airport because there's no flight instructor. Go in, talk to them. Chances are they have something that you may be able to do. At least they can direct you properly.
There's definitely a network at every airport where, even if it's not prominent, you can ask around to pilots who fly there. Hey, are there instructors in this area, or maybe the next airport down the road? And one of the things you can ask about is, do you offer the formal training? And you can start people off on the term private pilot's license, because that's what a lot of flight schools will come out with. But a lot of people don't know what that really is or what that entails. What is the private pilot's certificate?
So in the US, and I believe in much of the world, private pilot certificate, some people commonly call it as private pilot license, that is the step one That's what you need in order to build a career. Many people, that's all they get, and they stop there and they fly for leisure all the time. But a lot of people then go on to other careers. But the private pilot certificate is sort of the first step. And we believe that nationally, most people take maybe 70, 80 hours of training to get there. And there's costs associated with that.
And if anyone looks us up on the internet, you're going to find that the costs have definitely gone up, Gopal, since you and I learned to fly. We're averaging somewhere in the $12,000 to $20,000 range just to get a pilot's license and 80 hours. That sounds like a lot. And I'm thinking some people might say, can you just do that in a few weeks? 80 hours doesn't sound that long.
Yeah, so 80 hours doesn't sound that long. 12,000, 20,000 is a lot of money. However, this 80 hours need to be done over time. So it's not unusual for people to take 6 months or 9 months to go through a full private pilot certification program. And Elaine, I believe you have some thoughts on how you may be able to do it for cheaper.
That does sound like a lot of money, and the costs have gone up. I'm reluctant to say how much it cost me to learn to fly some years ago because it was quite a bit less, and everything has gotten more expensive. But there are some ways you can reduce the cost, and one of them you mentioned is stick with the training program and go often, because that is going to decrease the number of hours that you take to finish up.
Yeah, remember that this is 60, 70, 80 hours of flying time. So it's not the time you spend in the airport. And on top of this 70 hours, 80 hours is also time you spend with the instructor on the ground learning the book work that you need to learn, learning the regulation. All those things need to happen, and all that thing takes time. Plus weather, you can't just simply go and fly whenever you want, and the airplane may not be available when you want. So all this thing is what takes the time. And let's face it, not a lot of people can say, okay, I'm going to take the next 3 weeks and fly every day all day. That's not usually common, at least not practical for a lot of people. So that's why it takes 6 to 9 months to finish this 60, 70, 80 hours of training.
And on top of that, and you do want to be honest with people about this because they don't exactly want to hear all the time you do have to spend studying on your own, whether it's a video course or through textbooks that you can buy at the flight school or a mix, because sometimes people are working and traveling in between their flying lessons. There's a lot that you have to do on your own in terms of studying.
Yeah, but in order to become a pilot, there are certain steps you have to go through. The beauty is today with technology, there's a lot of online programs, there's a lot of YouTube courses. There are things that you can do sitting at your own living room, listening to audio tapes or listening to webinars that can teach you, and you can take practice tests at home. A lot of things that you can do that you don't necessarily have to go to the airport or meet somebody in person like we used to when we took lessons, way back when.
The wealth of materials out there has definitely increased, and it's a matter of making sure though that you're doing things in the sequence under the guidance of your instructor. It's very easy to jump around on YouTube and look up videos on this and that. For example, you can look up on YouTube how to fly an airplane, and you'll get millions of things on a million topics. But what's the reality? What do people need to know about this before going in? There's a lot of misperceptions about flight training.
We hear 3 myths from students all the time who are starting to fly, that there are misconceptions. What is the number one, Elaine?
The number one is that it is really hard to get past the medical requirements.
Yeah, so people think that the physical requirements, the medical requirements are hard. And yes, there are requirements. Yes, you have to go through doctor exam. And we talked about in the previous episode how this has changed. We talked about the Mosaic program. Can you remind our viewers one more time what the Mosaic program is?
Sure, with a traditional private pilot, you did need to get that basic medical exam from a specific FAA designated doctor. It's not that tough, but it's something everyone has to go through. And now you can learn how to fly in very much the same way in the same types of airplanes with just a driver's license qualification no special medical exam. So that's something that some people may be able to skip if they're flying for leisure.
100%. If you want to be an airline pilot, if you want to fly for corporations, there are much stricter regulations. But for most recreational pilots, physical requirements in most cases are not the hardest. It's not going to be a challenge.
There are reasons to get that pilot medical. For example, if you do want to fly larger airplanes that are higher and faster than the normal training categories. And so that's something you could pursue, but it is still not as difficult as people think. It's a very basic physical, and you will have to disclose certain medical conditions, but you can certainly ask your instructor about anything that might be disqualifying.
Of course. And that's why we start with the goal. What is your goal? What is the reason you want to learn to fly? The number two myth, Elaine, that we hear, and this is going to sound weird, is that some people think it's easy. How difficult could it be? Just like driving a car, right?
I do hear that. There's a funny story where I did meet someone interested a long time ago, and he had read some marketing materials from a flight school that said, it's like riding a bicycle. You don't really forget it. And once you learn the skills, it's fairly easy to do. And I told him, well, it's not quite that easy. And it is something that is easy to forget to know how to do if you lay off for too long of a time, because he had visions of flying a very large propeller aircraft across the country and landing on water. I said, that's a fantastic goal to have, but it's going to take you more than a couple months to get there, because he had the idea that he could become a private pilot with a seaplane rating in a couple of months. And so I talked to him about the steps, and he went from there.
That's interesting because ironically, the third myth we hear is that it is too hard. I cannot possibly learn to become a pilot. You hear that?
I hear that a lot, probably more commonly than the it's the easy part. And that is because you do get caught up in all the things you have to learn. And the topics range, as you said, from theoretical things like aerodynamics to meteorology, another big topic, regulations, which doesn't sound like the most exciting to people, along with knowing how aircraft are operating, put together, and maintained. Yes, you do have to know a little bit about aircraft systems and how to take care of them. That sounds pretty overwhelming, and that sounds like that may be too hard for most people. What would you say about that?
I think the answer is somewhere between it's too easy and too hard because there are a lot of pilots. Yes, you have to put in the right work. Yes, you have to learn certain systems, but that's part of what the training is. It's not like going to a medical school, but it's not like going to kindergarten either. So the answer is right in the middle.
Somewhere in between. And again, you find the right mentors, the right instructor, the right instructors. They will guide you through every step of the process, and everybody will bring those strengths to the table.
Yeah, the basic thing is that if you're passionate about aviation, this will come somewhat more natural and it doesn't look like work. If you're a student pilot or learning to fly, what steps have you taken? We would love for you to share it so that others who are watching this program can benefit from it.
So, if you do decide you're interested in learning to fly for personal travel and for fun, the most common route you'll take is to stop into your local flight school to check it out. And if you sit down with a flight instructor like you, Gopal, what are some of the steps you'll take them through once they've learned the overall basics of what they need to do?
So, the first thing is to understand the goals. It is very important that whoever wants to take flying lessons and become a pilot is very clear about what is that they're trying to accomplish, because the program can be designed to make sure it meets your requirements. That may not just be goals, it also how much time you can spend, like we said, how much money we have are you trying to get this certificate in 3 weeks, or can you wait for 6 months to get it or 9 months to get it? Everything depends. So that's usually the first step in the process. And most flight schools, if not all the flight schools, will offer what we talk about as a discovery flight or a introductory flying lesson. And we highly recommend taking that, because that gives you a chance to connect with a flight instructor, talk a little bit about the goals, but also decide, is this something you want to do? Because it is a commitment.
So that's kind of like a miniature flight lesson. And these are really cool because Gopal, they're in the pilot seat while you're instructing them on how to fly the very first time. That is really cool.
Yeah, so unlike regular cars, airplanes, almost all of these airplanes have dual controls. So whether you're sitting on the left seat or the right seat, you have the yoke, you have the stick, you have the rudder, all the pedals and everything are duplicated, which means that the instructor who is sitting typically on the right seat can help you with things, or if you mess up, they can correct it, they can teach you, they can demonstrate it. So yes, from day one, they put you in what you would call as a pilot seat. And that is fantastic because you're experiencing everything firsthand. Most often, they're going to do a assisted takeoff. They're going to do a assisted landing. And then when you're in the air, they're going to tell you, okay, fly level, climb, turn, all those basic maneuvers. So it's a fascinating process, I think.
It really is. And when I was an instructor at a local flight school, I got to do a lot of these discovery lessons, and they were a lot of fun because people did not realize how much of that first hour they could spend actually flying the airplane.
100%. And also, it weeds out the folks that decide, this is not what I want to do. I thought it was this, but it's now something else. And we'll tell you, because of the time commitment, because of the money commitment, you would rather make those decisions early on rather than going through the process and finding out that this is not what you want to do.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of the time, you're going to get someone come back from that discovery lesson, say, okay, I'm really in on this, sign me up. How do I start?
Step number two, in at least in the United States, we have something called TSA, which is the Transportation Security Administration that you see in the airports all the time through security lines. If you are a US citizen, you have to show your passport, and the instructor endorses that, yes, I have confirmed you're a US citizen. If you're not a US citizen, including permanent residents, have to go through a fingerprinting process through the TSA. And unfortunately, you cannot really start your lessons until that process is completed. That could take maybe 6 weeks, and there's a little bit of a cost associated with that. But we highly recommend that you do that because otherwise, you may not be able to proceed.
So you can start that early if you're interested, and I believe that's almost a 100% online process that your instructor can help you with.
Yes, it's an online process, except for you have to go to a fingerprinting office in order to get you fingerprinted. But once it's done, usually you're good as long as you're staying with that particular instructor or a particular flight school.
So once you have that taken care of, what is the next step?
Number three is to make sure you go past any medical hurdles. So if you need to get a class 3 medical, that's the basic level of medical certificate that we talked about. Go get it done early. Go get a student's pilot certificate early. Why? Because if there's any issue that you did not even know about that could be a challenge later on, again, you would rather find out before you spend a lot of money and time. So that's step number three.
This is where I also get a lot of common questions. You've probably heard some of these, Gopal, where somebody will say, "Oh, I take blood pressure medication," something along those lines. Is that always going to be a hindrance to taking that next step?
Yeah, we actually talked about in the episode we did about this Mosaic program. And for most part, the answer is no, it's not going to be an issue because the FAA, at least in the US, the authority that governs all flight training, has specific qualifications or disqualifications of what medication or what medical conditions. There are certain medical conditions they do not want you to be flying. For example, if you are prone to seizures, that is not a situation they want you to be up in the plane in case you get a seizure while you're flying. Diabetics, to some extent, it's allowed, but if you need insulin or could pass out because of hypoglycemia, that becomes a problem. But blood pressure, as long as it's in control, again, if you're in medical care, if you're in decent health, usually it's not an issue.
There's a lot of medications that are allowed by the FAA for flying pilots. So there's a list that's too long to name, but I know that's one of the conditions I get asked a lot about. The second most common is eyesight. Okay, I've worn glasses since I was 10 years old. Is that going to keep me from a pilot's license?
Well, if you're going for an airline pilot certificate and that is the highest level, there are much more strict eyesight requirements. But if you're going for a recreational private pilot type certificate, basic eye level exam usually will do. And usually it's not a problem, even if you're wearing eyeglasses or contacts. Most of us do, and it's not a problem.
Sure, even up to airline pilot level, and I think something like 2040 should work as long as you have the corrective lenses that you need, and anything common will work from glasses to contact lenses. I get asked about that a lot, and if you have any condition before you get your medical, you can certainly check it out beforehand because unfortunately the medical process can be a little onerous. You don't want to be denied one and you don't want to have one revoked because of a condition that you hadn't described. So if you talk to an instructor or a doctor who's familiar with this process about the paperwork ahead of time, that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and that's why we recommend doing that early in the process so that if there's any issue, you'll find out before you spend all your time and money on it. The fourth step is now you're ready to start your ground instruction, you're ready to start your flight instruction. That's the 60, 70, 80 hours of training that we talked about. And every flight school has a pretty similar process. Some have more regimented syllabus, some have a little loose syllabus. And if you're working with independent flight instructors or flight schools, sometimes they can change the order in which you can do things. And next week, we'll talk more about a regimented program, but that it becomes a bulk of your training where you learn the book knowledge, you learn the flying knowledge.
And you can do those all together in any given week. So you can study a little bit, take a ground class online or in person, and take a flight lesson or two.
My recommendation, and most instructors will say the same thing, is that you learn a little bit, go fly, and then learn a little bit, and then go fly. That way, what you read on the book makes sense when you're flying, and what you're doing in the airplane can make sense after you read it in the book.
And there's a really exciting milestone that's maybe about 10 to 20 hours into your flight training where you get to solo as a student pilot. You actually have to fly the airplane all by yourself during pilot training, which is another thing people don't realize.
Yeah, and as an instructor, this is one of the most sacred responsibilities, right? This is the first time you are letting a student go fly the airplane by himself or herself. And this is a big responsibility for us as a flight instructor, but that's exactly what we are trained for, to make sure they are ready to fly solo when we think they're ready to fly.
And then they actually build some solo time beyond that as part of their training program. Now, this doesn't mean you can go blast off 200 miles away. There's very strict rules where you're just starting at the airport first, and then your instructor may let you go a little further and a little further as you go. But that is a milestone for everybody. Everybody remembers the first time they solo by themselves, and it is a really cool part of the program.
Exactly. And depending on which certificate you're going after, they may be cross country, as in going from one airport to another airport, how far you have to go. Most of it is supervised, or you need to get the instructor involved in planning and approving so that you don't get yourself in trouble, because it is easy to get yourself in trouble. So that is number 4, finishing your ground and flight instruction.
And then there is a group of
Step number
tests.
5. Step number 5 actually has 2 parts, and maybe some people don't know this. You have to take a written test. You can take the written test early, but mostly it's useful to take it sort of partway through your flight training so you know what you're learning on the book. And you need to pass that written test. And if you pass a written test, at least in the US, it's valid for at least 2 years. But within 2 years, you have to go take what we call as a practical test, or a check ride. That's the term we use, with a FAA designated examiner. And that's when you become a private pilot. Voila.
Now I want to hear more about this test. A lot of people don't realize that there are some tests you have to take to finish up. And is that easy, hard? How well are you prepared?
So the written test, there are a lot of help out there, the online training, online, they call them online ground schools, where you can go learn the material in a very systematic way, take practice tests. So when you go take this test, it feels like something you have already done. And and the passing grade is something like 70. So it's not a unusually high grade to pass. So if you know your material, you should be in good shape. The flying part depends. But this is where, again, instructor comes in. The instructors know when you're ready to solo. The instructor knows when they can let you fly into a cross country to land in another airport. They know that you're getting better at reading weather reports, etc. And Elaine, something that is very different in maybe flight exam that's probably not true in everywhere else, there is a guidebook that the examiner uses, so you know exactly what you're going to be tested on, you know what standards you have to meet, and therefore, dare I say that passing this is purely in the hands of the student.
If you're well prepared, there shouldn't be many surprises.
Exactly, and that's precisely where going with a good instructor or a good flight school is so critical, and we'll talk more about that later.
If you're a flight instructor, tell us the best way to get students started and what are your experiences as a flight educator? It is really fun, Gopal, talking to student pilots and new pilots about their experiences. And I've learned a lot about some of the best tips that we can share with people who are thinking about starting out.
Yeah, we have our top 5 tips that we would like to share. The number 5 is shop around. Whether it's a flight school locally or an independent flight instructor that you're going to be working with, there are a lot of choices. Even in the smallest town, usually there's more than one choice. So we highly recommend that you get to know this flight school, get to know the instructor, shop around, make sure you ask people who have worked with them, so you find out exactly if there's a match in terms of what the flight school's goals are or availability is versus your own goals and availability.
I definitely agree. And there is no problem with having more than one instructor, changing instructors. They do come and go sometimes. And so it is okay to pick up on a new instructor every now and then. And in some cases, you'll learn a lot of things that are a little bit different because every instructor has a different teaching style. Number 4 tip is think hard about your flying goals before you get started on that journey to the pilot's license, because while we talked about there's a little bit of a dropout rate with people just due to circumstances, due to life happening, taking too much time or too much money, that same thing can happen once you become a pilot. And so what I tell people is, remember, this is a license to learn. Once you get that certificate, you are out there in the real world flying by yourself, flying passengers, maybe family and friends, and you are continuing to learn. So I tell people, if you want to fly for fun, you can continue to rent at the flight school in the same aircraft that you trained in. That is probably the easiest way to get started, and take passengers up when you start feeling comfortable. And most of all, keep learning from the flight instructors you enjoy learning from, because your skills can only get better from there. And flight training actually does not touch on all of them.
Number 3 is start early and fly as often as you can. It is quite extraordinary how much you forget. So let's say you're flying only once a month. There's a lot of things that you're going to forget from your first lesson by the time you show up for your next lesson, that you're going to be spending most of your time relearning what you learned the first time. So we highly recommend, if you can fly 2 or 3 times a week, go do that. If you can fly 2 or 3 times a month, go do that. Whatever frequency you choose. This is why goals and knowing how much time and money you can commit to it is very critical to.
And related to that, our number 2 tip is consider cost, but don't make that the number one thing. Also look at quality. We talked about looking for the instructor who is right for you. And while cost is going to become a factor, don't be afraid about considering paying a little bit more for the quality of aircraft, for the quality of instructor you want, to a point. As you shop around, you're going to learn the spectrum of the prices for flight training in your area. So while you don't want to overpay for something, you also don't want to go with what's the cheapest and the fastest, because you may not always get the most quality results.
Completely agree. And our number 1 tip, not so surprisingly, it is all about the instructor. We already mentioned a couple of times that it is super important to get to work with a proper instructor. What do I mean by proper instructor? Chemistry between two people may not work. It is life. And the learning styles and the teaching styles may not match. So if you are working with somebody and you don't like certain style, or you're not really learning, or maybe you plateaued, don't quit. Try to find another instructor or another flight school, talk to other people. My recommendation is that even if you're flying with a primary instructor, always go fly with another instructor, because every single time you fly with somebody else, you learn something different. Elaine, remind me again, the dropout rate of people who start their pilot training but don't finish it is pretty staggeringly high.
The national average, from what I understand, has gone up to almost an 80% dropout rate in terms of student pilots. And unfortunately, a good percentage of those do not complete the program for the reasons that we talked about.
Yeah, that means that 20% finish, 80% don't. And therefore, make sure you have your goals proper. Make sure you know how much time and money you can commit. Make sure you find the right instructor. And if it's not working, change the instructor, change the flight school. And that would put you on a path of success.
And as a bonus tip, we should point out that your typical 2 and 4 seat airplane is not the only thing you can learn how to fly starting out.
There are various other kind of aircraft you can fly. We have talked about gliders in the past. Light sport, we did a whole episode on that with the new medical changes. Helicopters, there are many other kind of aircraft that you can fly in addition to traditional airplanes.
And in the next episode, we'll talk about if you are interested in going beyond the private pilot. What if you would like to look at this as a career path? Stay tuned for the next episode and we'll show you how.
If you're a student pilot or thinking about becoming a pilot, please share your motivation and goals. Motivating each other is a big part of aviation community, and we welcome your thoughts.
This is aviation, aviation intrigue.